Sorry, everybody. Thank you all for coming, and thank you again for being patient while we got ourselves together. We have quite a lot of people on Zoom with us today, so I think our Zoom platform is using some muscles it hasn't used in a while. But welcome, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. I can see a lot of excitement in the chat already. I know I, for one, am super excited. And I think you heard some voices of some other people that we'll get to meet today. And I'm sure that just made everybody all the more excited. But I thank you for everybody sending thoughts and prayers that use Zoom frequently. But to start today, my name is Chloe Green. I am the Public Programs and Outreach Manager here at MCHC, or the Maryland Center for History and Culture. So you might have heard from me a few times, and hopefully you all got my message this morning with the Zoom link. If you have anybody you know who's having trouble jumping in, please feel free to share that link with them. It will work. But to go ahead and get us started so we can get right into it, because you all are here to hear from Vicky and Bonnie and Calista and Polly, not me. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Victoria Rose Pass, who is going to be our lovely moderator for today. She has been with us in the past for our Claire McCardle work, and she will be taking on this Zoom call. She will be taking on this meeting today and hosting our wonderful panel. So Vicky, I'm going to go ahead and give it to you.
Apologies for all the technical glitches, but I know you all are just as excited as I am to have this conversation. This is like my dream gig, I've been telling people, because I've been a fan of the Muppets since as long as I can remember, and Miss Piggy is just like one of my true fashion icons. And so today we are joined by three of the incredible women who brought Miss Piggy to life. We have with us Bonnie Erickson, who began her television career working with Jim Henson as the first costume designer, as first a costume designer, and then as the design director for the Jim Henson Company, where she created characters for many, many of the Muppet television specials and series. And I know you know some of her most famous characters, Miss Piggy, of course, who we're going to talk about today, but also the heckling old men in the balcony, Statler and Waldorf, and the ever cool Zoot, the saxophonist for the Electric Mayhem Band, who is currently now starring in a new show. Maybe some of y'all have been watching. And with the enormous popularity of Sesame Street, Bonnie went on to extend her design responsibilities into licensed product development for both the Muppet Show and Sesame Street. We're also joined by Calista Hendrickson, who started her career working in theatrical costume shops and then began designing costumes for Jim Henson's characters in 1977, beginning her work with Emmett Otter's Jug Band Christmas and several seasons of The Muppet Show, followed by The Muppet Movie, The Great Muppet Caper, and The Muppets Take Manhattan. And Calista created Miss Piggy's wardrobe and her most stylish looks for appearances, photo shoots, PR events. It was really a full-time job styling Miss Piggy, which we'll talk about in the 1980s. And of course, Miss Piggy always credited her wonderful clothes to the house of Calista. Hendrickson went on to design costumes for many other shows, including the series Encyclopedia, for which she won an Emmy. And finally, we're also joined by Polly Smith. Polly has worked for the Jim Henson Company since she was brought on board to help create costumes for The Muppet Show in 1978, and has since designed costumes for many Muppet film and television projects, as well as costumes for several other children's television programs. Polly received Emmy nominations for her designs for the Jim Henson Hour in 1988, and Muppets Tonight in 1996, and has received 8 Emmy Awards for her designs on Sesame Street. Polly also co-designed costumes for the TV series The Storyteller, which won the BAFTA Award for Best Costumes in 1989, and The Storyteller Greek Myths, which also received a BAFTA nomination for Best Costumes in 1991. Some of Polly's film credits, which I'm sure you will know, include Muppets from Space, Muppet Wizard of Oz, Muppet Treasure Island, The Muppet Christmas Carol, and she was also part of the design team for the films Muppet Takes Manhattan, The Dark Crystal, and The Labyrinth, other favorites. In 2002, Polly was chosen as one of 200 women to show their work with the exhibits Women Designers in the USA 1900 to 2000 in New York City at the Bard Graduate Center, including her costumes for Miss Piggy. Welcome, you three. Thank you so much for joining us today. And we're so looking forward to hearing about Miss Piggy. I wonder if we could start by just having each one of you, by way of introduction, talk about how you each started working for the Jim Henson Studios.
I can start. Yes, I probably
Great.
was there first. I got my job with Jim because I heard from Fran Brill, who was working with the company at that time, very early on days of Sesame Street, saying that he was looking for a costume designer for a project he was doing. At first, I thought she was kidding because I knew him from all these incredible things he'd done on all these variety shows and things like that. But the second time she told me, I decided, yes, I think I should go show him my portfolio and see if there's a job here, because I was doing a lot of freelance costume work and theater work for about 7 years before that. That was my first meeting with Jim. And that's when I showed him my portfolio.
That's great. Thank you. Calista, do you want to go next?
Sure. I actually never had a regular type job interview with Jim, but my portfolio was doing the Emmett Otter Jug Band Christmas show, basically. After I did that, I was called in. He was editing the show at the time. We were getting ready to go back and do, I think, more Muppet Show. Anyway, I was called in to speak to Jim, so I came, and he just said, "Okay, what do you want to do for the Muppets?" And I said, "I want to do the clothes. I think you have a variety show there with the Muppet Show, and you need some changes of costume, make it more interesting." And he thought about it and he agreed to that. But he said, I also want you to try making puppets. He wanted everybody in the workshop to be involved in making puppets. So I did a little of that too. But that was basically my my job interview with Jim. And and then it was just a whirlwind of work, you know, one thing after another. And I went to England that summer to work on the on the Muppet Show. The thing about Emmett Otter was that these were full body puppets. They were not just to the hips, you know. They had legs and feet and shoes and, you know, fully dressed. They were more like Beatrix Potter characters. They were woodland animals all dressed in clothes. So it was a big job. It was an exciting job. It was the first time I worked full time in the workshop. And an example of the kind of collaboration I discovered was I was doing costumes for a character, Gretchen Fox, who was a very haughty Victorian woman. And Ari Kasel was building that puppet, and I could talk with her about the shape of the body and say, well, if you're making the body, why don't you try to do like a corseted Victorian profile, powder pigeon kind of look, you know. So then I realized, oh my God, puppets are great. You can even design their bodies. So I also discovered how wonderful it was to have the puppet right there, to drape the pattern for the costume right on the body. How much easier it was to have fittings, that when you work with actresses and you have to get them in there and you have to make them happy and they tell you what they don't like, you know. I loved the puppets because they didn't talk back. I'm sure Polly had the same experience.
Yeah, I can second that.
Yeah. So that all that part of it was very exciting to me. That's how I ended up working with the Muppets. And I then went on and did the second season of the Muppet Show, the Muppet Movie, the third and fourth seasons of the Muppet Show. And then there came a time when I had 2 children at home and I wanted to be in New York. So Polly then took over the 5th season of the Muppet Show.
Okay, and Calista hired me. That's how I ended up there. I came, they were building the first Muppet movie, and I came in for a few weeks and made Gonzo's little plumber outfit. And then I was hooked, because I just love these little clothes. And
I think that was your job application as far as I went, when I saw that little work shirt that was just so perfect.
I know. And then I was leaving. I booked a 2-month trip to Greece, and Calista said, call me when you get back. And I got back and somebody else called me first. I took this job at this public theater, and Calista came and hunted me down. I guess that shirt must have been pretty good. And she was going back to England, and she wanted a little bit of staff in New York, because she would call and we would build things. And when there was a pouch that went over once a week with stuff from New York. And so Joanne Green and I were hired, and Calista went off to England.
Yes, Joanne was our milliner.
Yeah.
All the hats.
I have to say, Calista didn't always remember to call with work. So we sometimes had to sew very slowly, but eventually the call would come in. And then, as Calista said, her kids had to be put in school. She couldn't do the 5th season. So I went over to do the 5th season. And I guess that would be my interview with Jim, because that was the first time I worked with Jim, you know, just thrown right in and doing it. And then, so he offered me work on the Dark Crystal, which was immediately following that. So I stayed in England to work on that. And it just went one thing after another after that. So Calista, first of all, she said, I think it'll be 10 days a month, you know, maybe part-time. And it was 24 years full-time before I got a break.
Yeah, you were there much longer than I was. But yeah.
And I think for those who don't know, the Muppet Show was filmed in London because no American producer would take it on. Amazing.
Jim was told that the Muppets don't belong in prime time. No puppets in prime time.
Boy, were they wrong. Well, Bonnie, why don't we start talking about Miss Piggy? Can you tell us a little bit about her origin story and how she came to be?
Well, first of all, I didn't expect that I would be carving pigs when I went to work for Jim. The first thing I showed in my portfolio were some things that I was doing myself, which were these full-size, life-size muslin females wearing my antique collection of clothing. And I think that's what Jim saw when he hired me. That's the 2 women that I did with I had a collection of antique clothes. And one of the first things that I did was to do these costumes for Frog Prince when Jim brought me in. And I knew I really was not a puppet person. I was really costumes and design. I had an art background. And eventually I started doing some of the experimenting with puppetry. And I loved everybody I was working with. At that time, I think there were probably only about 7 of us in the shop, including our receptionist. And everything was very collaborative. We had a lot of people coming in and out doing all kinds of other jobs. Vaz Fazakis doing remote control things, Kermit Love, more design. But Don Celine was really my intro into the puppetry world. And that picture that you're looking at now is, you can see it's the very beginnings of the carving of a pig. And I was starting to experiment with that method. Before that, almost everything had been done with flat patterning on foam, covered with a fleece fabric. And so this was sort of a departure. And that's my group of pals from that first year. Carolee Wilcox, Vaz Fazakis, John Lovelady, Kermit Love, and Don Celine. And because of that collaboration, I was able to learn about puppets. And I know Calista was talking about how you don't have to worry about inseams and all of that because you don't have a live puppet, a live performer, but you do have puppeteers and you have to figure out how to cover them. So there is a problem with that. And I had to learn how to make puppets performable, because that was the whole point, to make sure that it was a tool that these performers could use. And so that was the very beginning of the pigs, when Jim said, I need 3. I'm doing a bit called Return to Beneath the Planet of the Pigs. And there we are. That's Cindy Chalk with me, getting them outfitted for their first appearance, supposedly, in Sex and Violence, which was one of the shows that Jim was doing to try and interest networks in doing a full Muppet show. And you can see that they're in their costumes, but just before we were to film that, there was a request from Herb Alpert. Herb Alpert was in England. He was doing a show. He wanted Jim to come. And we quickly threw on a new outfit for the pig. I went to the eye drawer. I got some big eyes. I found some wigs, some better than others, I've noticed in the photographs that we've been looking at. And I quickly threw on a satin dress. And because I didn't have time to make new hands, because originally she had hooves, I just wired some gloves. And I'm very happy to say those gloves have had quite a history since then. So this is a first picture of the pig as her sort of glamorous self. And then we went back to doing the taping of the original Sex and Violence, where she went back to being sort of a starlet.
Yeah, so she went through quite a bit of change over the years.
Yeah.
So Calista, I know when you came on board, you had a bit of trouble convincing Frank Oz, who ended up playing Miss Piggy, that she needed costumes. So will you tell us how you convinced him to change his mind?
Well, you know, Frank came from a traditional family of puppeteers where every puppet had their look and their costume, and they didn't change clothes. And if you think of Howdy Doody or puppets that you remember, they always wore the same thing. So I was following Jim's kind of rules about how to make puppet costumes when he said, you know, make them fluid, make them, you know, add feathers. The lighter they are, the better. So I suggested to Frank that because Miss Piggy is backstage and she's an actress, she needs a backstage robe, a kimono, a peignoir, whatever. So he, you know, he agreed to try it out, and I made a pink, something that looked something like that, except it was trimmed with marabou rather than ruffles. But he, you know, made the most of it, as Frank always did. Once he discovered the possibility of the costumes, he really went with it. So that was the first hurdle, and after that, he loved having more costumes. But that robe that sort of floated through the backstage as she was having a tantrum over something, it gave her a new look. And I think we changed her wig. Of course, she needed a better wig, and kind of she became more glamorous as the days went on.
When did the boa come in, Calista?
Well, there were always those boas lying around. They used boas.
There were
Once
there were boas everywhere.
Yeah.
I couldn't identify when she finally had a boa, but you know, there was always something that was in flight when she was moving around.
She just, once she had one, she seemed to cling to it.
And then I made the decision that because she had high aspirations, that she would always wear kind of fantasy colors, blues and pinks and purples, and no earth tones, because she was getting away from the barnyard. That was my.
Thank you, Calista. I just want to say a quick thing about Frank, and that is that initially Miss Piggy was puppeteered by several different people.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until that first year, and in fact, the first season, that we were doing the Muppet Show, where there was a script where Jerry Jewell, Jim's writer for many years, had written a script where there was a karate chop of Miss Piggy to the Kermit. And it was Frank and Jim, the perfect comedy team. He gave such a swatch to Kermit that we all knew that was going to be who Miss Piggy was. And from that point on, Frank created this incredible character with Miss Piggy over time.
Yeah, and it's such a treat having heard that from you all, to go back and watch the early episodes of the Muppet Show and watch how Frank develops the character and how the costumes that you all designed with that movement and the sort of luxurious appearance, you know, I think there's a little bit of Halston in there, but then of course we have so much of that old Hollywood glamour with her beautiful lavender gloves that are her signature, of course. And then, you know, the touch of class with the pearls. But yeah, those, you know, fantasy colors, like you were talking about, Calista, her purple eyeshadow, that, you know, she really develops over those early years.
The
Yeah.
pearls are practical. The pearls were practical.
That's right. Do you want to tell us, Bonnie, about the pearls?
I would just say that when we went from being beneath the Planet of the Pigs, and they lost their costume, and she had to become a little more glamorous for the other piece we did for Herb Alpert, you could see where her neck joined her body. And so the obvious thing to do was to add some pearls right at that point, not unlike yours.
Yeah, you can see that a little bit better on this early
Right.
Miss Piggy. Yeah. So Polly, can you tell us a little bit about what, you know, you sort of joined the Muppet Show once it was like this big success. What was it like when you joined the team, and what was it like as a place to work?
Oh, it was like nothing I'd ever seen before. It was fabulous. The workshop for the Muppet Show was right off the soundstage. And in there you had puppet builders, costume builders, prop builders, people dressing puppets to go on stage. The green room for the puppeteers was there. Guests were coming through and puppeteers were entertaining them, pulling a puppet off the rack and entertaining them. And then twice a day, the tea lady would come and everybody from the soundstage would come in and be crowded. In the meantime, we're in a really tight schedule. You can't stop sewing for a minute. I mean, just turning things out. So we just had to work through that. But it was so exciting. I loved it. And I think seeing the puppeteers entertaining these people and how the people would focus on the puppet and not even see the puppeteer. And I just felt that they became even more real characters to me. And as such, I wanted them to have finished clothing with hems and everything, because I didn't want to do anything that was under my control that would take away from the reality that they were a real sophisticated with dignity character. And that took some time, because so often you're crashing a costume out so quickly, you don't have time to finish everything that's not in frame. But I always gave it the best shot I could to do that.
And can I just want to say something about that, because when I first started doing my very realistic costumes for Emmett Otter, that was kind of frowned upon by Kermit Love, who was the puppet guru there, who would say, "Oh, but puppets are all about illusion," and so, you know, those finishing details were things that he didn't care about. But I think for the Muppet Show, it was perfect, and they were characters that you dressed like you would real people.
Right.
The other thing about the collaboration on the Muppet Show that I want to add is that upstairs was the writer's room, and the writers were in the same building. So if they had some idea, they could come walk through the workshop and talk to the puppet builders or the costumer and just like kick around an idea. And then maybe that would lead to some sketch on the next show. But it was just a wonderful melting pot of creative people. I haven't experienced anything like it since.
Yeah, it's amazing just the way that everybody like really was able to collaborate in that space and put these like amazingly detailed worlds together that really made everything so believable and rich for somebody watching it.
We were working in another country. We were all pretty much in a you know, we were all together socially, and you know, we weren't all having to start each day new again. We were just into it.
Yeah. It's amazing. So Bonnie, what was the response like to Miss Piggy on the Muppet Show when she made her debut? Was she like immediately a star? Did it take her a while to kind of get noticed and pulled out of the chorus lines, or?
Took her a while, but people have asked me if I knew she was going to become that popular, and I said that I didn't know that, but she definitely did know that. And I have to say that the first year we were doing the first season, we had a bus that would take us out to the studio and back again from London. and it said the Muppets on it. And people would come up and say, what's a Muppet? But by the end of the season, it had already started to play in England. And people were starting to really notice that bus. And we were worried we might have to paint that off because they were starting to come up and want to talk to everybody about the Muppet Show. It was very popular. And during that season, the diva went from being a chorus girl. If you look at some of the early openings of the show, you'll see her come across the stage as a chorus girl. And then she found her footing as she would. And thanks to all the fantastic costuming that carried on that same personality, her sassiness, she was named after Peggy Lee when I realized that I could give her a name. And that was because I felt she was a very strong woman, very, had an opinion, was very talented. And I loved calling her Peggy Lee until our attorney said, maybe we'll drop the Lee part. It was an homage to Peggy Lee, but I think the writers, the costumers, everybody really, and certainly Frank, promoted that whole feeling about a strong woman with maybe some misgivings or illusions about who she was.
Yeah. So Calista, Miss Piggy, really did become this celebrity from the Muppet Show, and then of course into the movies. Can you talk a little bit about what it was like to style her in this period? She's in this sort of meteoric rise to stardom, and what kinds of things were you thinking about in costuming her in those years?
Well, in terms of her costuming, I always like to think of her looking in the mirror and what did she see when she, how did she respond to what she saw in the mirror? And I think she was very much involved in her own fantasy of herself. She was ready to go for it, given the opportunity. My favorite moment in the Muppet movie is when she gets the invitation to go to Hollywood with Kermit and Fozzie. And she says, "Oh, I'll be right back." And within 30 seconds, she's fully dressed in her outfit with her suitcase packed, like she was just waiting for that opportunity. So the character of Miss Piggy, I think, was so universal. Her qualities of self-delusion and her doing her very own version of somebody else when she put herself together. When they became such celebrities, when Miss Piggy and Kermit were just very, very popular at in the 80s, I guess it was late 70s, early 80s, and they were doing all these TV appearances, and I would try to keep her looking very au courant about whatever it was that was popular at the time. Like they made an appearance at the Emmys, and it was at the same time that the Robert Redford, Mia Farrow, Great Gatsby was, I think, one of the nominated films. So I dressed her in a 20s, cloche hat with dangly stuff. And I don't know, I just always tried to click it into something that was going on in the world of fashion. Or when Bo Derek had that 10 movie where she was jogging with her 10 sweatshirts and her hair in braids and beads. And then we did a picture for People magazine or for some publication where it was Miss Piggy, but it was an 11 on her shirt. She was always striving, but also very deluded in a humorous way about herself. I used a lot of Hollywood references, obviously, and you've done a beautiful job of picking out these photos that reflect some of the work that we did. But as the person who was most identified with Miss Piggy's style, people would come to me all the time and say, I think I know the real Miss Piggy, that they took this character from this person I know. And there's so many Miss Piggies out there that I think you you identify with this character because you know her somehow already. I think these little sketches that I've made little notes on, if you move these little, I just used a little template when I was doing my Piggy sketches because it was always such a rush, and I would just, do a little like paper doll cutout to show the shape of what I wanted. And there's a page here that has a list of some of the things I had. I don't know if you can move it along to the next. Anyway, there were some rules. Yeah, like here, I'd made these notes about Miss Piggy, and if she ever wears a hat, it's very important that you don't cover both her ears. You always have to see at least one ear. I mean, I don't know. I was on a trip.
I love these notes though, because I think they tell us so much about how you were thinking about the costumes and the way that, you were combining these kind of references to classic Hollywood. I mean, I know for me growing up on these movies and the Muppet Show, like that was my first exposure to classic Hollywood. And then I went and saw the films.
I am just like you, only for me growing up, it was the magazines, the movie magazines. I just bought them all, Photo Play, all of them. I knew all about Hollywood. And I had a doll. I had a grown-up doll that I would make clothes for. So this was just an extension of my own fantasy life as a child, really. But I think we started in the Muppet movie with that montage of Miss Piggy and these different Hollywood looks when she first sees Kermit and she goes off into her fantasy world, and there's a film noir look and a winchy kind of, I call it Tom Jones, but it's a reference to the Tom Jones movie, not the singer. And this Victorian look that's here. So, she lived in, her mind was always focused on some other fancy world. Now here, this little picture of her sitting on her suitcase hitchhiking, I called it her Dale Evans look. She had a little neck scarf tied on the side. And there was a reason for that, because the puppet was disintegrating the neck of the cover it up. I know that first Muppet movie was really amazingly just nuts, but wonderful. But you see, in those days, when she's sitting on her suitcase, if everybody sees that picture, there was the puppet, and then we had to add the legs and sort of put it all together in a kind of haphazard way. After that, of course, we got much better about full body puppets and half body puppets, and then finally the photo puppets that we used for all the photographs that I did when we had the photo studio.
Holly, can I ask you if you'll share with us like what some of the key elements you think of for Miss Piggy style? What were some of the things that you thought were most important when you were designing for her?
Well, pretty much a lot of what Calista said, the same thing. I mean, you always thought of Piggy's attitude with her shoulders and flipping her hair, and you wanted something that would go with all that. And quite often if I was working on a TV show where there weren't going to be a lot of long shots, I was always conscious of getting whatever I wanted to say chest up, because she's going to be cut off at chest level more than likely. So that's where the jewelry and the feathers and some glittery fabric and all came into play. If she was, some like Peppa, a little something on her shoulder or something, a big hat, whatever I could get into frame. So
Great wig.
yeah, the Piggy, that Piggy from Muppets Tonight. We were doing an episode with the artist. I think he was then known as Prince. Maybe he was formerly known as Prince then. And he insisted on his costume shop building all his costumes, which my costume shop would usually do. So we had all this time to build puppet costumes. And there was this scene, it was with Mozart, and it was Piggy and Annie Sue and a couple other pigs all done up. And at 2 a.m. Friday night, Martin Baker comes in and says he's pulling the plug. We've run out of time. And I was just begging him. I said, we've all got our second win. Let's keep going. Let's keep going. So this never got shot, never got used.
Oh, no, really?
Yeah, very, very sad.
Oh, it's a
But it
great
lives
photo.
on in a beautiful photo.
Yeah, I'm glad I took a picture of it because who knows what happened to it.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I answered the question there. I got a little carried away.
No, that was great. That was great. And Calista, I wonder, I think, all the movies have amazing costumes, but I think, Great Muppet Caper has some of the most amazing ones, of course, because Miss Piggy was working at a fashion house.
Yeah,
in the
and that
movie.
film she was kind of playing the Devil Wears Prada character that well, she was the assistant to the designer, and she had a lot of airs of pretension there. But let's see, can you go back to the previous ones or not?
Yeah, absolutely.
That was, yeah, okay, so this was the big tap dance number in the nightclub, and the dress, was made with willowed ostrich, which is rarely ever, it's very hard to find. One of my assistants, Carol Spear, knew where to get it in the garment district, and it's literally little strands of ostrich that get tied together to make them long. So, it has this very ethereal, lovely movement. And yeah, that was a great costume, and Carol built it actually. So then that was Ginger Rogers was the one who wore it, and you've got it there with that Top Hat was the movie. So that was a Hollywood reference that gave me a lot of clout in Hollywood, because there was a big book of Hollywood costumes that Deborah Nadoolman did maybe 10 years ago, and the centerfold is Miss Piggy in this costume.
Oh, yeah.
That's amazing.
And
then you of course had, the whole fantasy sequence.
let me just talk a little about this. Aside from the styling of it, of course, this bathing suit is what is part of the fantasy when she's in the fashion show modeling this outfit with a very long cape. She falls into the pool, and then this whole fantasy of the water ballet begins. But I just want people to know that we were doing this before there was any Photoshop, before there was digital photography, before there was any computer generated images, no CGI. So literally Miss Piggy puppet was on Frank Oz's hands underwater. He was in a wetsuit performing when you see her underwater. So it's almost ludicrous now to think about that, but
Calista, there was also the little person in a whole bodysuit.
Yes, there were 3 different sizes of a Miss Piggy swimmer. That one did a high dive, one just just jumped. I don't know. There were 3.
Well, they also promised that it would just be a one-off, but they had to pull one of them out of the water for another take, and it's foam rubber. It's like a sponge. I mean, water's just pulling the costume down. It's frightening. It's a very quick.
I might call it a nightmare, but
That's showbiz.
got through it somehow. And when I actually watched that movie recently, and I remembered all those wet pigs waiting to drive for the next day. It was really it was Jim's first big movie, and he pulled out all the stops, really trying all these things. Because there was not only the water ballet, there was a motorcycle chase, there was Miss Piggy climbing up a drain pipe. But all of it is done in real time then. This was not something people generated on a computer. There was a beautiful scene with all the puppets on bikes. After we'd done Kermit on a bike in the Muppet movie, they loved this idea. So they had a very romantic opening with all of them biking around Kensington Park in London. And, it was a very ambitious film. And of course, Jim would always start his films early. He'd have a start date, and then he'd say, no, I think we're ready. And it was like, wait a minute.
Who's ready? Yeah.
All of us had gone to London. They had started shooting it. Amy, my good friend Amy Van Gelder, looked at the costume and said, no, no, no. I know Calista meant to put some violets on the dress. And she went out and bought those violets that are her little corsage in the front. But yeah, we had to like pack it and ship it, and it wasn't all done. I mean, Polly had a lot of experiences like that too.
Yeah.
But
Yep, Polly, will you tell us? So you designed some of the kind of Muppet costume dramas.
Yeah,
what was
I
that
think Muppet Christmas Carol was my first big film.
yeah,
And
these were gorgeous. Yeah.
I don't even know where to begin. I mean, I flew back. I was working on the TV show Dinosaurs in LA, and I flew back to New York on a red eye, probably Friday or Saturday night, and went into work on Monday. And Connie Peterson, who ran the workshop, had hired me a whole crew because we had like 6 weeks or 2 months or something. Everything had to ship to London. And the movie might not have started then, but they had to all be in boxes. And there were hundreds of costumes, and they were period. So, and I had nothing. I had no sketches. I knew the period because I'd done a couple spec costumes for Gonzo and Kermit for them to help sell the movie, or Rizzo, I can't remember. So I just got some research for a period shirt because all the male puppets were going to need a shirt. And then I just started photocopying research and then assigning it to different characters. And so then they could start draping what they had to do. And then I could run out and find fabrics, because I always found it was faster for me to run out and find fabrics than to sit there and wait for somebody to bring swatches back. Because I could just lay down the money, just buy 2 yards of everything in New York City and bring it back and start going. So that was a lot of fun. I mean, the other interesting thing was the puppets are playing characters. They're not just themselves. So, and they're, very few of them are Meryl Streep, they're going to shine through. So you have to think of their personalities and the character they're playing and try to meld them. Now, Boom Shakalaka or Benjamin Gunn, I think I was typecasting for Piggy because we just got to just put as many feathers on her as we could. And we had a very close relationship with American Plume, the feather company in New York, because one of the owners there loved Miss Piggy and was always bringing her gifts of feather boas and stuff.
I remember going to that place. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember him. So I got to go to their factory in Brooklyn, and he let me paw through things, misorders or misdyes or samples, stuff that was just laying around. I just got to fill bags with stuff. I mean, Piggy's feathers were a little more specific, but her whole tribe of boars were just, they all had feather headdresses. It was fabulous. And we hired this wonderful woman. I think it was the first time she worked there, Victoria Ellis, who made all these things. And they were just beautiful. I mean, it was just killing me because I wanted to make them, but I couldn't. I always, on any project, I do keep some costume back for me to make, because it just keeps me calm. Like I made Bob Cratchit for Christmas Carol, and I think I made Gonzo, one of Gonzo's costumes for, oh no, I think I made Gonzo's costume for that, I think. I don't remember what I did on Treasure Island, but sewing just sort of calms me down. And at the same time, I'm helping move the project forward. And so I can just keep moving forward, but not be so frantic. So I don't know.
We're getting a lot of questions in from our amazing audience. So I want to ask you some of those.
Okay.
Becca asks, what kind of details do you have to think about when costuming for Muppets that you wouldn't have to think about with humans? I mean, I think it was Calista who spoke to like having to cover up the person who's operating the puppet, but what are some of the other things we might not think about?
For me, I just want to keep them as close to proportions and everything that's a real costume. I really get freaked out when I see buttons the wrong size that make them look like doll clothes or something. I have the biggest collection of small buttons, because you got to buy them when you see them, because you might not be able to find them again. And Muppet Treasure Island, those costumes are all about buttons. And fortunately, I found a button store in the Lower East Side that was going out of business, and I just cleaned them out, and with Kermit's buttons, which had to be little military style buttons, 1/2 inch or 3/8 of an inch, I don't even know what it was. I found them someplace, and we had just enough to do this costume and the duplicates. And after that, we sort of ran out. So I would just say I try to keep them as real as possible.
Victoria.
Mhm.
I'd like to talk a little about the photo studio and the importance
Yeah, absolutely.
of, because after that 4th season of the Muppet Show, when I came back to New York, Michael Frith, who was the art director at the time, said they had a new job for me to run the photo studio. So the photo studio in the 80s was the way we were able to control all the looks and photography for all the characters. There was so many things going on at the time. There was the Muppet magazine. There was a lot of product. We were doing Miss Piggy's Guide to Life. We were doing the Miss Piggy calendars, which were extraordinary, studio setups of her fantasy world. So I think, in many ways, Jim Henson was a very smart businessman, as well as being a very creative thinker. So I think it was a really important way of getting the Muppet characters and the Muppet look to sort of, it was kind of before they talked about branding. I think that's what we were doing. We were just creating all these images that got our message across in very different ways, I hired a staff. We had a set builder. We had a costume designer, Bruce Morosco and Deborah Lombardi were doing that, and Dennis Smith. And John Barrett was the photographer that was hired to put together these extraordinary pictures. And I worked very closely with Michael Frith in coming up with what these images were to be. He would sketch and I would talk, and we'd put together these fantasy ideas, and we'd move on with it. And Frank was involved too. He would see what we were doing. But the Miss Piggy calendars, I think there were 4, maybe 5 in the early 80s, and they were the best-selling calendars in the country at the time. They were just extraordinarily popular. And some of these images this Omni cover came from one of those studio shots. The first one was done by Nancy Moran, who was the photographer that was downtown. And I think that's what prompted the idea of having our own studio, because traveling back and forth and not always having what you needed at the time, it was so much more efficient for us to have our own studio. Plus, that was when the workshop built us what we called the photo puppets, which were specifically for photography. They were full body puppets. They were like dolls that were totally armatured and posable, so that if you needed to, whatever they were doing, you could pose the puppet and get the eye contact and just, it was so much more efficient than working with, we initially started with just using the puppet and adding the legs, and it was such hard work. Also, because it was photography before digital photography, each of these photos took a long time to get just right. We're looking here at this, we called it Fragonard. It's actually a famous painting by Fragonard, but anyway, this is our version of it. But each setup would require many, many Polaroid pictures that we all examined in great detail to see what we needed to fix and what needed an adjustment, or what was showing that shouldn't be showing. So we had to keep taking Polaroids until it was perfect, and then get the shot. You do that all digitally now. I mean, it was extraordinary that we did everything in real time, and everything was handmade. Nothing was created inside a computer. And
Yeah,
I know
I was just going to say, I think these really speak to that level of detail and finish that you all were talking about, the level of craft.
Yeah.
Holly, you were saying that you helped to make this perfect scarf for Miss Piggy.
Yeah, when
Miss
we
Tanya.
looked at this the other day, I remember doing that. It was a green polka dot fabric, and with my little Sharpie pens, I transformed each dot into a Kermit.
I mean, now you could probably print something like that
Yeah.
digitally really fast, but you all were working analog, so using just a totally different array of tools to make these
Yeah,
incredible images.
We probably could have printed it then, but we probably didn't have the budget or the money. I mean, the budget or the time.
Yeah.
So
And Michael didn't like Photoshop at the time. It was kind of primitive and he didn't think it looked real. So we didn't use it.
I'd also like to just mention the Kermitage
Yeah.
book, which was
Yeah.
also the same, using famous works of art and duplicating them, and the detail, the incredible detail that went into the photographs. As did we pay attention to the costuming, to everything that we did. Detail was never anything Jim didn't want us to do. I think his feeling was that if you watch something more than once, you might find something you didn't see the first time around. And all the handcraft that was in all the films, in the TV show even, I mean, all of that was just, it was, talk about rich. That's what made it work, I think.
The Art of the Muppets was a wonderful, gorgeous book. Also, I want to say something about the sort of camaraderie in the workshop when I first started, because I was taken in by Don Celine, by Foz. With Emmett Otter, we had to have the puppet rowing a boat, and Foz had the boat upstairs in his studio, and I went up with him and we looked at the fabric I was going to use for Emmett's jacket, and we had to be sure that he could actually move his shoulders and row the boat. And you know, that kind of care, it's not just detail, it's the care to get it right, was so extraordinary.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this is a good question for Bonnie we got from Blake. Do you have any advice on getting into the puppetry industry? You sort of accidentally got into this line of work, but
It's hard for me to answer that because I just sort of really fell into it. I would say, you know, one of the things I've learned over time is that if you're really interested and you have a passion for something, you just hang in there, because people with less interest are going to drop by the wayside, and you will have perfected your skill. You will have gained experience. It's something that you really just need to follow and pursue. And I think that the camaraderie that we had at that time that Calista was talking about was part of that. People came in from all different walks of creative lives, craftsmen, people who had different specific skills. And there was a camaraderie, that's true. But there was this magical time for all of us where I don't think I ever did anything in the shop where I didn't ask somebody what they thought, ask for the opinion of a puppeteer. We were all able to communicate with one another. And I think that made such a big difference in the product. And I think we all, I mean, somebody comes to tell me that Miss Piggy's not real. I'm going, what?
no
Yes.
way. No way.
She had a reality of her own. I think my experience with Muppets was that when I joined, it was this small band of creative people. And within the time I was there, which was only about 10 years, maybe it was even less, it became this global corporation. So there was just a rapid growth of the company and the kind of work they were doing. Jim got into, Labyrinth and the other fantasy film, I can't think of it at the moment.
Dark Crystal.
Yeah, Dark Crystal. And remember there were the Dark Crystal people working upstairs, Polly, where that ended up becoming the photo studio. But you know, Jim would sort of choose people to try out for different jobs, and then you'd get placed in whatever one was the most appropriate or the one you really wanted. And it was
But at the same time, even throughout the years, even that it grew, it was a core group And we just, we would travel the world together. We'd be working in London, we'd be working in LA, we'd be working in Toronto, we'd be working in Vancouver. It was really a family.
Yeah.
And you had to coordinate, as more mechanisms came in, you had to work the costumes around that. We all worked together, I think, really well.
I would like to say something about the person asking for advice about how to get into working in a creative world like that. I had so many job interviews, and I had people coming in just saying how I just love how creative you all are, and I want to be creative, and and I would always say, well, what can you do? What are your skills? What are you interested in? What kind of skills do you want to start building? Because you need to have something to offer whoever's going to give you that job. Can you weld? Can you sew? Can you stitch? Can you draw? Can you just work on that and keep building your skills until you've got something that somebody's looking for.
Yeah, it sounds like it was such a magical place to work, which is always nice to hear as a fan. So we have a couple questions I wanted to pose to you all about Miss Piggy's style coming in from our great audience. So Suzanne asks if you all can tell us a little bit more about Miss Piggy's ever-changing hairstyles. We've alluded to her wigs a couple times. Were they designed to match the fashion or historical references, or were you thinking about her character when you were designing them, or her personality?
Well, I'll say the third movie I did, which was Muppets Take Manhattan, we were so relieved that it was popular to have a perm. So we gave her the perm, and it made everything so much easier because in Muppet movie, half the time we were like having to fix her hair before the next shot. And, with the perm, that was just like easy as can be. I mean, yes.
Every time Frank or something would put his arm down, the hair would go. So, you had to have somebody standing right there ready to grab her before she ended up upside down. But the curly hair worked great. And unfortunately, that went out of style. So then we were back like, oh my God.
That's so funny. I love that curly hair was more practical. Well, since we're on the Muppets Take Manhattan, Matthew asks if there were any particular influences for Miss Piggy's looks in that movie.
Well, she was kind of a working girl in New York. That's what I remembered. I mean, I had done some work on a soap opera, so I had this notion about when you work on a soap, you just talk about whatever stores that character shops at. Is there Ralph Lauren, or their Lord and Taylor, or their Bonwit Teller, whatever. And with Miss Piggy, in that particular movie, I thought she was more a Lord and Taylor kind of. This little white and blue outfit she had in the park was sort of working girl. I don't know. But she always had the same color palette pretty much. I had a funny story about Miss Piggy's colors because she appeared on a float in the Rose Bowl parade one year, or several years. I think they had a Muppet float. And they sent a sort of a plan for what the colors that she was going to wear, and they were putting her in yellow, and I said, no, she never wears yellow. And I actually called them up and said, no, Miss Piggy wears pink and purple and blue. And then when I was watching the Rose Bowl, Michael Landon was the actual commentator, and he said, and we got this crazy call from someone at the Muppets saying Miss Piggy doesn't wear yellow. So we went to great extremes, let's say that.
Yeah. This might be a question for Bonnie. I don't know if I can find it again, but somebody had asked where, here it is. E.A. Gorman asked, where did her amethyst ring come from? That big rock that she wears.
Oh, I don't remember. Well, I'm sure it came from a box of popcorn, probably. At the time we were doing all this, there were these wonderful sources in New York City where you could find anything you wanted. And there was Tinsel Trade. There were all the stores along 38th Street with fabrics and notions. And so It was a regular, we had a lot of people come in as interns and also people who were on staff who would be just in charge of shopping for things. I know that Polly liked to do her own, and we all sort of like to do our own because it's inspiring actually to go and see all these things. But I'm pretty sure the ring came from one of those places. I can't remember specifically, but I'm sure it was something that we knew she needed.
And the garment district was in full swing when I did
Yeah.
that. So, you know, all these pleated things. We went to Milligee Pleaters and we'd have, you know, scads of pleating done to do those capes and bathing suits. And the millinery district was in full swing. So, you know, you could just go and kind of shop and find just the right little bunch of feathers or flowers and get a dozen. And, you know, I even found a place where they would make up flowers with this little cast iron mold out of any fabric if you wanted, you know, like, it's just the wonders of that world have kind of gone.
Every time I go to the garment district, I'm just so grateful I had my career when I did, because it's
Yeah.
thinking every time I go, will that store still be there? And usually it's not.
Well, and there were feather merchants when we
Yeah.
first started out. For instance, with the Big Bird, we used turkey feathers that were sterilized and dyed. And at one point, because they were giving hormones to turkeys, they were harvesting them earlier and the feathers got shorter. So in spite of my telling Jim he should buy a turkey farm, he did not, but it meant that we had to make the armature underneath Big Bird's head larger so that the shorter feathers would give him the same mass that he had before. It was, I mean, those kinds of things just sort of disappeared. There was someone who could make springs for you, just the shape, the weight, the strength, whatever you wanted, just down the street. So those things just left the city.
It's amazing how much those materials being available matters to what you were able to create. Bonnie, I remember you talking about like the fleece that you used to use. They stopped making it, and so then you started experimenting with flocking the puppets.
That's right. That's right. We it was a short term where the fleece that had been used for a lot of the Sesame Street characters was no longer available. And Jim came across, as his early adoption always did, this method for flocking things by hand. Normally it was done industrially. They'd use it to make jewelry cases, things like that. But he found someone who could use a cylinder with fibers in it and connect it to an electric charge. And we could paint these surfaces of the carved foam with an adhesive that we could color. We could paint it, we could shade it. And then we would shake these fibers onto the surface at a regular angle throughout.
With an electric shock, as I recall, that made them all stand up straight. I remember that rocking.
They're all absolutely perpendicular. And we could pick the color, we could pick the thickness of the fiber, the length of it. We could mix it if we wanted to. I mean, it was quite amazing. We flocked everything in sight the first week we had the machine. But then it protected everything, because later when we went to try and find things in the warehouse that were going to be going from the family to these different museums, we found that the things that were flocked lasted because they were protected from the air and the light. So it had a second purpose that we didn't expect.
Interesting.
And since you're talking about the museums, Deirdre asked, Barbara asked about whether there was a book or archive with all of the sketches and fabric swatches and references that we've been looking at. And as I understand it, much of this material, and huge thanks to Karen Falk, who is the Henson archivist, who helped us to source many of the Muppet images that are in these slides. So many of them are in the Museum of the Moving Image, right, in Astoria in Queens, New York. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And
So-
also at the Center for Puppetry Arts in Atlanta.
Yeah. So
And the
much-
Smithsonian.
That's right, and the
Sorry.
Smithsonian. So much of this is preserved and is in those archives. And boy, would I love to get into those archives someday. I think we should wrap it up here. I could talk to you all for 3 more hours. This has been such a joy. I just wanted to highlight seeing some comments in our chat, folks talking about Miss Piggy as you know, kind of plus size icon for fashion. That's definitely how I received her. And one of the reasons I love her so much. Someone else also talking about her as a queer icon, hoping maybe she'll make an appearance at LA Pride. So let's keep our eyes open and see if we spot Miss Piggy out at Pride. Hopefully she'll be wearing something good.
I always had the wish that we could get a Miss Piggy column commenting on fashion in Women's Wear Daily, because when she first was wearing purple all the time, I read an article in Women's Wear Daily about children's clothing and how little girls seem to be wearing a lot of purple now, and they think it may have been because of Miss Piggy. And so, you know, and then I thought, well, Piggy should really be the one making the comments about the crazy fashion things that are going on with her own wacky opinions.
Yeah, and you can get some of that in the Miss Piggy's Guide to Life. So if you want more of Miss Piggy's fashion advice, it's a great source. Well, thank you all so much. If y'all are in the area or come down and visit us in Baltimore and see the exhibition, the Jim Henson exhibition at the Maryland Center for History and Culture, it's really fantastic. It's just amazing to get to see these characters up close and see all of this craft that we've been talking about. And there's some great video footage in the exhibitions. It's a lot of fun. So please come down if you're able. Chloe, do you have any final words to wrap us up?
I feel like today has been absolutely fantastic. Only thing I will say is thank you everybody for joining. Thank you again for being patient with us for the tech issues, but I hope this extra 15-20 minutes satisfied. And I saw a lot of comments. Please keep a lookout for the recording of this program. It will be dropped in 2 to 3 weeks on our website. So you will get to see all of these slides and hear this conversation as many times as you want. But otherwise, thank you, Bonnie, Polly, and Calista, and Vicki for taking time to have such a wonderful conversation. I hope you all got to see the chat a little bit while you were talking, because there's just outpouring of love and support and so many wonderful feminists also. So we're very happy to have everybody here. But thank you all so much for joining, and we hope to see you all at our future programs. But in the meantime, come visit the exhibit, and everybody take care. Have a wonderful day, and yeah, we'll see you all around.
Okay.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you all so much for talking to me.
Thanks,
Bye.
Vicki.